Welcome, everyone, as you're coming in and getting settled. My name is Rita McGrath. You probably know that already. I'm a professor at Columbia Business School, and my guest by the fireside this week is one of my all-time favorite people, who I'm so thrilled she made the time to come chat with us, in spite of what I know is got to be a punishingly busy time of year. It's Nina McLemore, who is an entrepreneur, a corporate wizard, member of the Committee of 200, and runs her own business, where she is known as sort of the secret sauce of powerful women. and I thought it would be just fascinating for folks to hear about a little bit about her journey and career. And feel free to ask questions in the chat would be best. And we'll get to some of them live. If we don't get to them live, we'll follow up with you individually afterwards. So do feel free to drop us a note. And without further ado, welcome, Nina.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. So I think we first met, I was a doctoral student, wasn't I? I was at Wharton when you brought the roadshow that is the Committee of 200 to Philadelphia.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that was fun.
And
so I thought, go ahead.
I find it interesting that there are people that one remembers the first time that you met them. And I have a very clear memory of the presentation that you made to us at that meeting. And there were a lot of high-powered people there. But your presentation stood out.
Oh, that was lovely. So there's a funny kind of male-female angle to that too, because the program was partially put together by my mentor and the PhD supervisor, Ian McMillan. And I was pretty new, getting started. And it was the women's president, women presidents who are my members of this Committee of 200. And he sort of says to me, well, I'll let you have the morning. That'll be easier. I'll do the afternoon and, whatever. So I did my morning and it was great. And it was like a love fest from the minute we walked into the room. Everyone was looking forward, taking notes. It was like just great. And then he comes in the afternoon, and this is a room full of high-powered executive women, right? He comes in the afternoon and he kicks off with some sort of joke. And they're kind of looking at him. And he follows it up with a couple of other jokes, which, in his 90% of the time, he's teaching all men, right? Or very few women in the audience. Anyway, he struggles his way through the rest of that afternoon, and he finally finishes the session, walks off ashen-faced, and he looks at me and he said, I had no idea what you must have to go through dealing with audiences of mostly men. It was just such a funny moment. It's very good. Anyway, I thought it might just be super interesting for people to hear about your journey. You small town in a small place, and look at you now.
Yes, Philadelphia. I actually grew up making everything I wore, but I was told that I had an ability for languages. So I was majoring in French. So my first risk, I guess, was at 18 going to spend my junior year abroad in France, all by myself, with a group, but all by myself. But the interesting part of it was that on the ship on the way back, there was a terrible storm and we were a day late, and it was really awful. And there were only a few people who were able to have dinner, and included in which were two buyers from Strawberry and Clothier in Philadelphia. And they had been to Paris to the couture shows. Now I'm going back to Mississippi to teach French. I got off the ship. I had a friend who had moved to Philadelphia. I called her and I said, can I come stay with you? And I called my parents and I said, I'm not coming home. I'm going to be a buyer in a department store.
That's fabulous.
I didn't have the nerve to ask the ladies for a job. So, the only job you could get was making 2 cents an hour and, 2% commission or something. So I got myself a job at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital, having no idea what Wharton was. Started taking night classes at Wharton and went back home to finish at LSU because I couldn't afford Wharton. Went to work for a department store in New Orleans, and that was the beginning.
Wow. And what attracted you to that? Like, what was the spark that got you excited about?
Well, fashion had always been really important to me. And in the South, how you look was really always very important. So as I said, I'd made everything I wore when I was growing up, and it sounded to me like they'd been to Paris, they'd been to couture shows, they did it 2 times a year or 4 times a year. I mean, I thought, wow, that's much better than, like being, I hate to say it, but being a teacher of French, which I'm sure nobody in Mississippi really wanted to learn. And my first job was great because I got promoted and got to be a buyer and a merchandise manager at a very early age. but I began to hit the ceiling. And so I was offered a job to move to New York to work for May department stores, which owned the Heck Company in Washington and May Company LA and May Company Denver. It owned about 13 different stores. And they were looking for somebody to run their international division from a merchandising point of view. And they wanted somebody with retail background, with women's clothing background, because that was the biggest part of the import business. So this is very early in the department stores going out and doing their own imports. So it was, so there weren't that many people who had a lot of experience. So I took the job thinking I'd be there for 2 years and I'd be getting my MBA in retailing, and was traveling all over the world, mainly Asia and Europe, deciding what we were going to buy where. And it was a great experience, and I learned so much. And then I applied for a job, and didn't get it. They gave it to some guy from Brooklyn.
Inside the company?
At May Company, within May Company. And they said, she's not tough enough.
What? You? Did they know you?
Anybody ever worked for me laughs really hard when they say that. So I realized there was a glass ceiling, and I got offered a job. I think this is an interesting lesson. I got offered a job to turn around a tiny little division of a big conglomerate, Gulf and Western. And it was in the accessories business, which I had a little bit of experience in. And I said no. And they called me back about 2 months later, 3 months later, and said, we'd like to talk to you again. I guess that nobody else would take the job. But in the meantime, I'd figured out what I would have done. And it was when, in the 70s and 80s, women went from being 28% of the workforce to 48% of the workforce. So you had this huge influx of women coming into the workforce for careers, to really build their careers. And nobody was making accessories for them. Liz Claiborne was a $100 million business, still private. So I went to them and I said, can we have the license for Liz Claiborne accessories? They said yes. And, I was happy, but I was also scared because we had to be doing $10 million at the end of the 5th year in order to get the automatic renewal of the license. No accessories company was a $10 million company in those days. And we did 50 in our 5th year. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And Liz, there's a whole story about the contract, but Liz Claiborne had the rights to buy us for assets if we were ever sold.
Wow.
We got a $50 million company that's got like maybe $12 million in inventory.
Oh, wow. Wow. And then what happened? I think that's around the time you went back for your MBA. Is that right?
I stayed at Liz Claiborne for 13 years, went on the executive committee. And in that 13 years, Liz Claiborne went from being private, $100 million, to public, $3 billion. The most admired company in America, the best place to work, cover of Fortune magazine. And I left in 93, and I had two things. One, I could see that the company was not going to grow anymore. When you have 35% market share, it's really difficult to grow past that, particularly when your channel of distribution, which is department stores, are declining a share of market. So, and I knew by that time I was an entrepreneur, but I didn't know how you financed businesses. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know how you went about that. So I decided to go back to Columbia Business School. That's where we reconnected again.
You reconnected. You were one of my students. I'm always proud to tell people that. I'm like, you're never going to believe who I had in my class. At the time I was teaching, I should just clarify, I was teaching in our executive MBA program, which is it's a degree granting course, but it's for people who typically have jobs or in the process of developing their careers or something. So these are people who are employed. It wasn't our typical 26-year-old MBA program. That was great. So you wanted to learn about finance and getting.
And then, I thought I would go back to the apparel business at the time, but I had a friend who was starting a venture capital, a private equity company. So he was looking for somebody who had been operational, because all of his experience had been in investment banking. So he'd never actually lived with companies. So we started this venture capital fund, and it was like, I was always saying, no, this is not a good deal because, you know, the management or this, that, or the other. And he was saying, oh, but look at the projections. So it was not a great experience to always be the, you know, naysayer. So I retired, and then my friends at Committee of 200 and various other organizations that I'm in kept saying to me, I can't find clothes to wear. And that was how this got started.
Wow. Well, and at the time, I mean, you know, paint us a picture of what the women's fashion business was like then. This would have been 2001 time period.
Yeah, 2003. Yeah, 2003, I think. Basically, you go to a meeting, and almost all the women had on either Armani or St. John.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody that I knew bought both. You were either one customer or another customer. Maybe they had on Dana Buckman or Ellen Tracy, but there were very few options. And over time, they've gotten to be even fewer because the market has either gone very high fashion, very glitzy, very runway, very, very much for selling the accessories, not for the clothes particularly. Mm-hmm. Or it's gone down market, mm-hmm. And it's gone younger, you know, so it's all about clothes for young women to wear, not necessarily with a professional look, sometimes definitely not professional look. So so I decided that there was a hole in the market.
And so how did you get going? What were the first few things you did?
Well, you know, my original concept was professional women. That's now about 60% of our business. Mm-hmm. Women who just want to look chic and elegant is about 40% of our business. Not professional, so to speak, but they're probably on boards in their communities and whatever. But, you know, all of my experience had been, you know, buying, you know, thousands of pieces. So I didn't know whether I could start a business and only manufacture hundreds. I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know whether you could start, if you could get people to sell fabric to you in that quantity, if you could get factories in New York to make it. So I went around New York, and I went and called all the people that I knew in the textile business, and then, you know, sort of did a test launch, and called all my friends. This is again where networking and joining the right organizations can be extremely helpful. I mean, it really is very helpful. So and my concept was I wanted to give women an opportunity to have I wanted to make clothes for women so that when they walked in the room, there was no doubt they belonged at the table.
You tell a story about that.
I was really pleased today. There are 2 women senators in the Washington Post today, both wearing my jackets.
Whoa, that's awesome.
One on either side of the aisle. So it was bipartisan. Let's just put it that way.
A bipartisan clothing choice. I love that.
And I wanted to give women an opportunity to have an income, because I'd seen far too many women, you know, basically compromise their ideas or whatever just to keep the job, or, you know, get passed over. You know, when the promotion came, they gave it to some young guy where you've got this really competent woman. I'd seen too much of that. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to give women an opportunity to have their own income. So I said, we're going to look at, and by this time, it's clear that the department stores are very seriously declining. And I didn't want, you know, 50% of my business or 75% of my business to be with Saks or Neiman's. That, you know, because if they changed their minds, which they do often, or made demands which you couldn't really afford to supply. So I decided to look at the country and say, is this city big enough to have my own store? And is the rent affordable?
Wow.
Or is this city the right kind of city to have women who are representatives and do private trunk shows? Or is there a better specialty store in this city that everybody knows about and everybody comes to? The internet wasn't such an important factor when we first started, but it became, it was more about branding and imaging, but it has become, that much, but it's a complicated business to be in a vertical business where you have to design, manufacture, put a sales force together, develop your own channel of distribution, and sell directly to the customer is much more complex.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest problem is finding good people. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard. It's really most smart women prefer to be in law or medicine or accounting or marketing.
I have a personal add-on to that. So I run the program at Columbia called Women in Leadership, and Nina had very graciously offered to come and speak, as an entrepreneur and a corporate founder, and all the other amazing things she's done. And one of my counterparties is a lawyer, and she looked at me and she said, "Well, I'm not sure we want someone from fashion in the course." You're not understanding what I'm saying here,
You're not you talk to anybody who has any inkling of what the fashion business is about, the first thing they say is, that's a really tough business.
It is.
Because you have to create 4 new collections a year. You have to make sure that you're, somewhat in sync with fashion. It's constant innovation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the questions in the chat is whether you've observed a change in the demographics of professional women at all.
Well, the first big change is when I started the business, women were 15% of the C-suite.
Mm-hmm.
They're now, I think, 24. Now that's a 15-year span. So we've gone up 9 points in 15 years. And the types of businesses that women are running is very different. Mm-hmm. You had Marilyn Houston at Northrop Grumman, which was a space, a tech and aerospace company. So that would not have happened. So you have a lot more women in engineering and in, various banking and accounting, women who are head of accounting firms, national head of accounting firms, women who are managing partners in law firms. That's totally different mm-hmm. than it was, 15 mm-hmm. years ago. And there are younger women. I mean, there are women in their 40s now or 50s who are at the CEO level. And it used to take much longer to get there.
Well, I think part of it's the dynamism that we see, in corporate strategy in general, which is as, and it's a good news, bad news, right? As competitive cycles shrink, when something goes wrong, it opens up an opportunity. So we joke a lot about the glass cliff, that like once every man in the environment has turned the job down, some woman takes it on and hopefully fixes it,
That is definitely, you can see that happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you get your first, I'll call them high profile clients? How did you sort of seed this creation?
It was, I can remember the day I was sitting at my desk at Liz Claiborne, and I was about a year into it. And I got this call from somebody who's talking about a new organization they're founding called the Committee of 200. Mm. And would you like to be? And by that time, I realized that I really, this was totally different from being in a department store. And, I really had to go out and get customers, and I really had to sell. It wasn't just about merchandising, and it was more about business. So I was a founding member. I joined right away.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's fun.
Yeah. And so by that time, I had joined also joined the International Women's Forum, Women Presidents Organizations, and then later Women Corporate Directors. So I think in the beginning, it was women who were in those organizations, because there weren't, now there are a lot more organizations that are industry specific, women in healthcare, women in food services, but at the time, and some of these organizations still span so that was how we first got. And then it was word of mouth. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, you asked me about Janet Yellen. I mean, she was word of mouth. I mean, somebody told her she should come shop with us.
Which is wonderful. Well, my first encounter with your clothes, not you, the person, but your clothes, was at a wonderful little shop in Princeton called Merrick's. And
yes, right.
kind of classic, very personalized, very bespoke. The sort of place my daughter would, like, if I dragged her, she would maybe come with me and she'd sit in the corner fidgeting while I tried stuff on. It was that kind of place. But that's where I was first introduced to each new season, each new collection. Very, very interesting.
And now, there was an article a few years ago in the Wall Street Journal, and they asked, they could use, photograph, and not photograph, but use photographs of women wearing my clothes, or women, professional women wearing my clothes. And then a couple of years ago, there was an article in the Washington Post with the same. So that press, I mean, as much as people talk about Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of it, press that you can search for years is much more, in my opinion, is much more valuable, because we get customers all the time who say, I saw so-and-so and looked up where she was buying her clothes.
And now you're featuring in a rap song. I love it.
I think that I used to sit in the audience and study why some of the corporate women were so successful. What was it about? What was commonality? And one of the things was sense of humor. Because men don't like to be in a meeting with a woman that's tense, where the meeting is tense and there's a tense. They feel very uncomfortable. I mean, most people feel uncomfortable doing that anyway. And so women have a way of deflecting, and she is great. She's got a great sense of humor. Yeah. And she's very smart.
Janet Yellen or Dessa?
Janet Yellen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Great sense of humor and very smart, and just she likes people, and she really makes a point of getting to know people, and so that's so cool.
That's so cool. So we're getting a lot of questions about some of your key learnings. I'm sure there were surprises and things that didn't go the way I expected, sort of along the way. Are there any you could count? Or would you like to share?
There were surprises from day one. I mean, frankly, the day we were to launch was the day we invaded Iraq.
Oh, jeez.
So I'm like, do I call people and tell them to come to a party? We've just invaded a country, It was the first time we'd invaded a place for a while. So, and then we've had two or three recessions, and the apparel. I think the biggest challenge has always been money. Funding. There are not very many people who want to fund an apparel business. If it's a business that's maybe really focused on the internet, maybe yes. So finding funding is always a challenge, and getting good people is and making, it used to be, I think it was really a surprise to me, because there were a lot of smart women who used to want to go into the fashion industry, and not now. And so it was easier to find good people. So finding people who are entrepreneurial, because this is an entrepreneurial business, and finding the women who can and do have all the qualifications for a representative is really a challenge. And of course, this year has been a huge challenge.
Well, I was going to ask about, going into, there we all were last quarter, 2019. My book just came out. I was flying all over the world. We had a nice party at Nina's place in New York. And then, Happy New Year, everybody landed. And then January, kind of bad tidings out of China, and February, things getting a little more dubious. In March, the world went off a cliff, and that has got to have affected your business.
What I've found really interesting is which businesses have done better, have been extremely strong during this because people's habits or needs changed, and which ones have been terribly affected. One of our customers is in the restaurant business, and they did some studies early on, and the first thing people wanted to do was to go out to eat. Now, I like to cook, but most people probably don't. So while restaurants have really been hurt, and it also depends on where your restaurant is, and do you have enough space for tables outside or whatever. Our customer base being generally women who are 40 and over, generally working, or if they're non-working, their lives also change and they have even more responsibilities for what they had to do. So I think this sector of women's quote unquote go to work apparel has been hurt even worse than most. Plus the challenge, so what we did was, of course, we thought last March, when I came to home to Washington, I thought I'd be here for 2 months, or a couple of weeks. Well, I'm still here. So the difficulty has been figuring out what's going to happen next. How much inventory do you have? What do you do with your employees? How do you staff or unstaff? How do you reward people? Because you just don't know from day to day what it's going to be like, or where people are going to. Michigan, for example, where we have a great store in Michigan, it was doing really, really well, and now it's got the biggest increases in the country practically. So it's and everybody, we did what we call special value promotions, which is we offered customers, if you buy X, if you buy $10,000, you really get 12,500, or if you buy, $5,000, you really get $6,500 worth of clothes. So we did those, and that worked. That brought cash in right away. We really put more emphasis on the web, and our web business, while it was down 10% totally for the year, it was up 30% in the second half.
Wow.
So, and it's up even more now, because more people are shopping on the internet. And most of them are existing customers. And we're beginning to, our independent salespeople are about 45% of our business, and they're beginning to do shows again. For a while, they just, who wants to have customers in their home?
Right, exactly. Now, one of the interesting things about your business, though, is you kind of tacked away from the bulk of the apparel business. If I think about the big trends in apparel, things like fast fashion and, having stuff made tens of thousands of miles away and shipped around container trucks. And you really wanted to do US based, local, where you could go and pop in on the manufacturing lines if you needed to personally, and that's just such a different philosophy about business that I think is worth just emphasizing as we're having this conversation.
If your raison d'etre is price and quick turnover in fashion, you can't do that in the US because of the cost. But if you're at a certain price point, frankly, by the time you pay duty, the wool duty is like 20%. And by the time you pay for shipping in air, which most of the better goods are shipped air, so with duty plus air freight, it's not that different. And I was just working on a cut ticket for a new fabric we just got in, and we could cut it every month, so I can adjust to what sizes are selling or what colors are selling. So my inventory liability isn't as bad. And our customers really appreciate that we're made in America, and we only use natural fibers. I mean, there's some things that we have that are viscose, but mainly we're natural fiber, which is, I think, certainly better for the environment than polyester. And we're not fast fashion. So I think there's a trend, that's one of the trends now, is really away from that. I read the other day that it takes 700 gallons of water to wash a pair of those jeans that have the holes all in them, and that are faded and whatever. 700 gallons seems like a lot, but it's some number.
Oh, it's an environmental disaster. I mean, if you follow it along. So my hypothesis about fast fashion, by the way, is that it's very strongly linked to the 2003 introduction of the first cameras in cell phones. And so once you had teenagers with cell phones with cameras, what are they doing? They're zapping pictures of each other around, right? And who wants to be in the same thing, 3 pictures in a row, right? And so what they wanted was disposable clothing. And if you can almost actually map the rise of cell phone penetration to the rise of fast fashion. You can almost, it's almost like 1-to-1 correlated. And then the corresponding map is the department store sales, which are like trending in the other direction. So who's up is like Ross stores and TJ Maxx, and who's down is like Gordon Taylor and the others.
I think part of the other thing is that women who are really busy and have other more important things they want to do in their lives don't want to spend a lot of time shopping. So if you can come to our store or go to, you know, a trunk show and in an hour buy your whole wardrobe for the season.
Oh, totally.
That is the most efficient thing you can do.
Oh, totally.
Placing an order online and then having to return it, or the whole thing can be very time consuming.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, I'm like your test case for that. I'll show up in an afternoon and hello everybody, and you know, and then Cheryl Ann just she gets me in the changing room and I'm there. Oh, absolutely. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's like my brain cannot function in a department store because I have to think about, like, does the belt on floor 5 match the thing on floor 6 with the I mean, I just can't put all that together. It doesn't work for me.
And the salespeople aren't very knowledgeable or very helpful.
No, not in most places. Not in most places. So if I'm shopping for the kind of thing I don't buy from your shops, I go to like Nordstrom's. I mean, that's the only way it functions for me. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, some of your guidance for younger women. I mean, you've been in a career at a time when the presence of women in the workforce has changed dramatically. And we're living in a period now where, you know, a lot of women are finding it just immensely difficult. You know, they're home, they've got kids, they've got careers they're trying to find, and many of them are kind of opting out. But hopefully the next phase of whatever this is will open up some more opportunities. Guidance, suggestions, thoughts for them?
Well, okay, so the first suggestion I have is that women have to dress and look better than men. Are you surprised that I have to that I'm making that comment? But I was talking to someone the other day, and she said, you know, she was just talking to somebody who had gotten a promotion, and the woman was sitting in a conference room waiting for a meeting to happen, and there was another conference room next to her, and the guys in the other conference room she overheard saying, "Well, I hope she's not just another skirt."
Whoa.
This is recent.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's awful.
Yes. So, you know, so you really have to present yourself in every way as a full-fledged, you know, player, so to speak. And I think the other thing I would try to say is I think there's some things that may be predictable about what's going to happen after COVID is over, but there are other things that maybe aren't so predictable. And so I think trying to see around corners and try to figure out what is happening, what is a trend, and why is it happening, and this is a short-term trend or is it a long-term trend? So I think that's really important. I think learning as much about technology affects everything, and learning as much about technology as you can. And then the last thing I would say is connections. One of the things I've found is that while this has strengthened some of my connections, it's weakened others, because I don't go to the conference. I don't go, you know, I'm not in the showroom when somebody walks in the door. I'm not traveling. So I think rebuilding those connections and making sure that you're putting yourself in a place where you are known and that you know you're out there, so that you know when there are opportunities that open up. And that's hard to do, particularly when you're a relatively young mother. It's really hard to do.
It really is. Yeah. I mean, one of the things we talk about in terms of networking is that you need two kinds of networks, right? So you need networks of weak ties where, do you know anybody who knows anybody who does something about agriculture in Afghanistan, and I don't know anything about agriculture in Afghanistan, but I bet you with 3 phone calls, I could find someone, right? That's the nature of the networks I belong to at a university because they're built to do that. And then you've got these execution networks, right? Where we're all heads down, dense, we can finish each other's sentences with enormous amounts of trust and so forth. And what I think often happens to women is we do that second network really well. Like, we get on with it, we're very capable, we're competent, but we don't give ourselves permission sometimes to take the time to go to a non-industry conference or spend 5 hours at a thing that a friend of a friend of a friend suggested might be interesting, and so I think we lose out on I think we have structural problems in many cases in our networks.
Well, I went to a conference. I think it was a C200. No, it wasn't a C200 conference. I can't remember which the organization was. And there was a woman in New York whose name is Davia Timon who was there. Mm-hmm. And the session was on networking. And everybody had to go around the room and say, how many people do you have in your quote unquote Rolodex? And she had like 1,200. And I was like aghast, or whatever the number was. It was a huge number. Every time I meet somebody that I think is interesting and that I can find a minute to put them into my contact sheet, I do. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how I think I'm going to recruit a rep in Atlanta who somebody introduced me to 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But I went back to her and maybe the time is right now. So mm-hmm. keeping in whatever form works for you, keeping track of people and writing down notes about them is crucially important. But getting yourself there. One of our customers said to me, one of the biggest problems with not going to the conference is what happens in the hallway and what happens, in the bathroom, about, somebody saying something that really is important that you, mm-hmm. That you get. So it's those sidebar conversations that are really mm-hmm. interesting.
One of my favorite stories about the bathroom at a conference is for years, I was on the design team for the Microsoft CEO Summit, which, being CEOs, they're overwhelmingly male. But, there were a few women who would come every year and you'd get to a break and there'd be this line of guys like down the hall waiting to get into the men's room. Whereas the women were just sort of sashaying in and out. We were like, this is both simultaneously wonderful, that finally they get to experience it, but it's also horrible because there's so many more of them. It was interesting. Right. It was interesting. It was great. But that was one of the few experiences I've had with that. So maybe talk a little bit about fashion more broadly, because, you've seen the whole sector evolve and change. And I think it would be interesting to think about where that fits in now. What are the big shifts we're seeing there?
Well, I think it's interesting because in the first part of my career, the department store was king. I mean, and people would talk about what's important in the department store, and it was always location, location, location. And if you had the shop at the corner of Fifth Avenue and 59th Street, you were going to do well. So it was about location. It was about having the right assortment for your customers who were going to walk in the door. And it was about having the good presentation. The salesperson and the marketing were not at all important. And there used to be a joke about don't hire anybody for marketing who comes out of the department store world because they don't know anything about marketing. You got to get somebody out of consumer products. So, and then what happened was the real estate play, and people began to build a lot of retail shopping malls. Mm-hmm. So in the beginning, that was great for the department stores because they could build, when I was at Liz Claiborne, people would come in and say, we're building a new store. And we had these new store packages, here's we're going to drop ship you the new store packages. But then they got to be too much and the overhead got to be too much. So I think the first big problem was overbuilding. Mm-hmm. Because it also allowed the rise of stores like Limited, Gap, who found it easy to put a new store. So that gave the rise to these vertical retailers, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember 579 shops and you
Oh,
know.
wow. I haven't thought about them in a long time.
Exactly. But so there were a lot of, and Brooks Brothers went from, Madison Avenue to having stores all over. Ralph Lauren had their own stores. And then so you had a fixed overhead that got to be too much. And then you had several recessions.
Mhm.
And the only way to get people to come in the door to buy was to go on sale.
Mhm.
So it was sale, sale, sale. So now when I first started, we sold 85% at regular price.
Mhm.
Now it's 40%.
Really?
And then on top of that, you had a generational shift. You had the baby boomers, the bust period, and then now the echo boomers or millennials.
Mhm.
And so and they weren't used to shopping in the department stores. And on top of that, you had the growth of the internet.
Mhm.
So it's created that between the generational changes and the price point changes, and the fact that China, when I first went to China, everybody had on the same clothes. It was either the blue uniform, the Mao uniform, or a Green Army uniform. I mean, literally men and women. So you couldn't tell who was who. I can remember going to Shanghai in 1981 and having red Charles Jourdan sandals. I thought they were going to cut my feet off because they'd never seen anything like that. So now you've got 250 million middle-class Chinese who want the fashion. So when you look at the European fashion, who used to sort of really determine what the trends were, basically they're doing clothes for the runway to sell the accessories and the handbags. And if you look at all the European designers, 75 to 85% of their business is done in East Asia.
Wow.
We are not America and working women are not anybody's target market. Because
So that's your niche.
yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. And that I'm surprised it hasn't changed more. I mean, these are people with money to spend and, a need.
Yes,
And
but we're not going to stand in line at Gucci and pay $1,200 for a handbag. We don't need it.
no, it's not happening. Not at all.
No.
That's great. So, in terms of, you've been pretty passionate about women presenting themselves well. Do you have a short list of like fashion disasters you try to warn people against?
Oh yeah. Well, actually, Forbes did a study some years ago,
Oh, uh-huh.
and they asked they identified fashion disasters, and one of them, which is not the fashion, is dressing too sexually provocative.
Mhm.
Because it's distracting. I'm using that as a word, a euphemism. It is distracting to men, and they think that you didn't get there for your brains.
Mm.
And the women don't like you either.
Right.
So it's really a lose-lose. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, if you dress too frumpily, then people discount you. So it's a difficult thing to wear. I mean, to figure out. But I think so. In terms and I think some prints doing too much, too busy is also not good. Doing anything that reveals your body, whether you have a great body or you don't have a great body, both sides are not good. So on the flip side of that is, what do you do to have the right image? And I always think, personally, these high collars I think they make everybody look taller, they make everybody look slimmer, they make you look like you have more confidence. And a solid color jacket. And I do strongly believe in jackets. When you're sitting at the table, even if the guys don't have on a jacket, it makes you look more serious.
Mhm.
So, and fit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've said in the past that everything you've learned in life you use in some way. What causes you to reflect on that?
Well, I think about that. My mother was an extraordinary person and she was an artist, but, having made everything I wore and having done, firstly, in the beginning, I did the handwork. I did all the cutting and I did all the basting and I did all the hems and did all that. And then finally, when she thought I was ready, I got to do the machine work. But every time, there's something wrong with the fabric or there's something wrong with the stuff, I know what it is. And then, I like to go to factories. I like to go to the factories that are weaving the fabric or that are making, they're making this stuff, because when you see how they do it and you see what the machine capability is, sometimes, you look at a machine and say, well, if it can do that, then it could do, something else. I think life is constant learning. I think constant learning is crucial. I read 4 newspapers every day. I mean, I don't really read 4 newspapers every day, and there's always a book by my bed. And so I think, I'm a big believer in asking questions. I'm very curious. And it's amazing sometimes what you learn when you ask questions and you're really interested in that person or what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you lost a job once because they didn't think you were tough enough. Which I just find hilarious. So maybe a bit of a reflection, you've been doing this a while now. What do you think makes a great boss and a great work environment?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, because it's something that I've pondered a lot in terms of how many people who are the people one knows who are universally loved and where the work environment is very exciting, who are also very successful. Because we were talking about this last night, and somebody was referring to Steve Jobs and said, the company was a great company and achieved great things, but he was not a nice person to work with.
He was a jerk. I mean, he could be a real jerk.
But he built Apple. So, if you're overly tolerant of mediocre performance, then the company doesn't do well. But I think the main thing, and I hope that people in my company feel this, I must say, we are not a fashion company. We are a company that has a passion, and the passion is women's advancement. I was talking in a cab one day coming from Union State, from Penn Station, and I was talking to the cab driver who was some what we would call third world country, and I was talking about this kind of thing for some reason, and he said, "You don't understand." He said, "In my country, it's not about the advancement of women, it's about the survival of women."
Wow. Wow.
So what I feel is that if we can change a woman's life because she feels confident about how she looks and she gets that kind of response, and I can give women an opportunity to have their own income, and we can give some money to help women, that to me, and I hope that mission is what really makes this a good place to work.
Well, I would imagine you're pretty demanding. I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean, you have very high standards and your products have very high standards. And so I would imagine that goes together, right?
Everybody knows me when I say, what are the 2 words that are most important? And they all know it's smoke, fire. When there is something wrong, it's never an aberration. If there's a flaw in a garment, or if something doesn't get to the customer on time, or somebody's name isn't in our database, it's not just one. there's some systemic cause behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Or if there's a flaw in one garment, there's probably a flaw in all of them.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. So smoke, fire.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Amy Edmondson talks about a concept she called psychological safety, and she said she wished she'd called it radical candor, because the idea is that you people not only need to feel comfortable speaking up, but they need to feel that they have an obligation to speak up, is what she talks about. So, do you consciously cultivate that in the folks around you?
I try. I once published, and I got some not positive feedback. 9 rules.
Oh, 9 rules. I'd love to hear those.
And one of them is, if you know about a problem and you don't tell me about it, and I find out from someone else, I'm not happy.
Right.
Right. Or if you know about a problem and by the time you tell me about it, it's almost not fixable, I'm not happy.
Mm-hmm.
So I will never be unhappy if you tell me about a problem. We can solve it, no matter what the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells you where I stand.
Absolutely. Well, and do you, like, I find even with the best of intentions, sometimes someone will bring you news that is really not great, right? And how you react in that little moment is really going to shape how that conversation and subsequent conversations go.
Well, I really, if again somebody comes and tells you, here's a problem, I just found out about it, how do we fix it? Fine, you go, you deal with the problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing I think is really important, is you deal with the problem. You don't deal with who, what, when, where, who said this, who said that, who said the other. You just try to fix the problem. But I don't respond well when people always have an excuse, like it wasn't my fault, or so-and-so didn't give it, because then my experience is that person never is accountable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. And, and you see that all the time. Students, the dog ate my homework. I mean, come on. This has been going on for a year and you never had a moment where this could be fixed. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're getting sort of toward the end of our allotted time together. And I always like to ask, how do people learn more? How do they, like, maybe they're interested in working with you or participating in your world somehow? I gather your shops are open now?
All of our shops are open. And there is a person who looks at NinaMcLemore.com emails. I don't, but they pass them to me. Or you can just call the New York office and find out that way. And if you want to buy something, you go to the website, and Francine is great to take care of you on the website. Absolutely. She calls every person.
She what?
She calls every person who makes the purchase on the website.
Oh, that's great. That's just great. Yeah. Well, and I can say, for those of you who follow me, you've been seeing an absolute parade of Ninas throughout this past year, as we've been doing the firesides and as we've been learning about new people. So, do you have kind of thoughts on what you'd like to see as we move through this, whatever this is? Do you have a sense of where you'd like to be, like this time next year, in terms of the business? Do you think it's kind of steady as she goes, or do you envision changing it in some way?
Basically, what I want to do is I think now is a good time to find women. So I want to expand our sales force dramatically.
Yay. Okay, that's great.
So I want to put a lot of women to work. And I think it's also a good time for real estate. So if somebody out there knows about real estate, I think it's a good time to find some good locations, but it depends on where. Some places it's absolutely not, that their housing prices are way up, and that there's nothing available in terms of real estate because it's a hot area. But in other areas, that there is some good real estate.
Mhm, mhm.
So basically, I just want to have, basically what I want is for people to know about our clothes. I always say that there are people who like ultra modern and their designs and ultra modern homes, and there are people who like traditional, which looking at your background and looking at my background is traditional. So some people like, and some people say they only want to wear black, but so I just really want people to know we exist and to have us as a choice.
That's wonderful. Oh, that's great. Do you have an Instagram?
Yes, but I don't know. I'm not good at that.
I have an Instagram, but I'm here to tell you the reason I have an Instagram is because I've got wonderful people who manage it for me and they know how to speak Instagram. So that works out really super
I need
well.
help I need help on social media or electronically if anybody out there wants to help.
Oh, cool. Well, we should talk. I might have some resources for you. Well, Nina McLemore, what a pleasure to chat to you. I am looking forward to my spring Ninas, which I have yet to connect on getting into the house. But I'm just so thrilled to have you, and best of luck with what comes next. And let me know if I can help.